Relic weapons. When it comes to prestige and the ability to, well, look cool, many people lean towards using the glowiest Christmas tree they can find for their character. I'm no exception, collecting a ton of these things over the years that I've been playing. They kind of make me feel some very small sense of accomplishment, whether they actually do deserve the respect I give them or not. They're fun to collect, and it's always nice to be able to see yourself in the dark. In the patch 6.2 series, Square Enix plan to release the next set of Relic weapons, always under different names. We've had Resistance weapons, we've had Anima weapons, but this time they're going to be called Legendary Mandeville weapons, literally set around the, in my opinion at least, hilarious side story questline involving the daring detective of the same name and his bombastic sidekick Nashu Makaraka. The thing is, this obviously surprised a quite number of people. For one, Hildibrand is mentioned on the live letter part 71 slide here as being a requirement, so the somehow further Hildibrand adventures is an actual unlock method for these weapons, with quest-centric progression they mention lasting throughout the entirety of 6.x and this entire expansion. To me personally, as someone who actually enjoys the Hildibrand sort of slapstick comedy as a bit of a nice distraction from the super serious main theme of the game's rich and rather majestic storyline, this came with a very big smile on my face personally. This was not shared by some in our community, so I decided we'd just ask the comment section on that live letter breakdown video what they felt about this. There are obviously no wrong answers towards this. I just kind of want to get inside people's heads and see what they think. Was it a good move to lock relics behind Hildibrand? Who is negatively affected by this? There are so many questions. Well, we've got 74 replies, so let's read some of these out. Again, if I didn't read your message, I actually read it off of the video, and yeah, thank you very much for contributing towards this style of video. I do appreciate you. So 74 replies. Let's just go randomly through these. So this person, 206 Zelda, says, Final Fantasy XIV Sprout of 1 year here. Oh, this will be an interesting perspective. What I have to say may not carry much weight, but in light of Hildy's questline being absolute gold through and through, and upgrades still being arbitrary and not a gate to lock mainstream content, I'm okay with it. It seems like more goodies to unlock and even more reason to keep up with Hildibrand, and maybe something more rewarding for everyone. I was with WoW for 16 years, so perhaps I'm desensitized to locking upgrades behind unnecessary gates, but at least this one is fun, end quote. You've got a point there, especially considering the arbitrary nature of having a relic weapon in the first place. Its item level will be best in slot at the end of the expansion. That's usually what happens with relic weapons. We've seen that with the Anima series, the original series, with resistance weapons. All that sort of stuff becomes best in slot, at least for a very small window. Usually after the final tier has already been out for considerable amounts of time in Savage content. And of course, these weapons aren't relatively useful in content like ultimates and things like that. So at the end of the day, is it actually that much of a thing if you don't do a relic? Well, I personally don't think so. So I would agree with you that it's more of like a reward system to be gated behind that. Will everybody agree? Absolutely not. But let's continue through these. So, the Encapturer says, I see this as no different than, say, locking it behind Eureka or Ivalice. If you don't like it, that's fine, but these types of complaints are nothing special. Just look back then. People will speed through the locking content for their relic if they don't like it, but still really want the relic, end quote. Great point. Obviously, skipping storyline is going to be something a large portion of people will do just simply to get the reward at the end, and that's totally fine. That gameplay is, it's not exclusive to the Hildibrand questline here. We've seen this through the MSQ and things like that. This is the very reason that story skips exist as well, for convenience, as well as for alts as well. You've got to bear in mind that some people play on multiple servers, right, across multiple data centers even, including myself. So it is nice to have a nice shiny weapon, and sometimes you don't want to go through the entirety of it. There is quite a lot of Hildibrand quests though, so that's going to be a lot of skipping, I think. Ache655 says, I'm personally not a fan of the Hildibrand quests. Watching behind my back now for the community's assassins. Oh, definitely watch your back here. The comedy is fine, he says. It's not my style. I find it more annoying than charming. And the cutscenes are so long. I already watch long cutscenes within the MSQ. I don't want even more to watch through. I'll do what I usually do the quests and skip the cutscenes. I'm just more interested in grinding out the relics. As long as that isn't a massive pain, I'll be fine with it. End quote. Well, the thing is with relics, they're designed to be content that's obviously optional, which is the main reason statistically why they reserve their best in slot nature towards the end of an expansion, right? So that most of the content's done. So a lot of that will come down to, do you like the look of said weapon? It will give you an advantage, however, for the next expansion. That is something to bear in mind. But of course, like you say, you can skip the cutscenes, and the grind is always quite lengthy. And especially some people prefer different types of grind. We've had light grinding before in various stages, including Eureka, that people disliked. But personally, I quite like a light stage. I think that's a little bit more therapeutic than having to collect items, for example. And in A Realm Reborn, you had to collect items that were either crafted or, alternatively acquired, or through Grand Company seals and things like that. I'd rather just have a nice set progression of things to beat my head against, but that's just how I prefer to do it. So I think it's subjective whether it'll be a massive pain or not. So we'll have to see what variety of things they choose to make us go down. Sameki Izuio, sorry if I butchered your name, says, having an alt going through the quests again seems like a chore. Oh well, at least Heavensward Hildibrand quests have rewards. It does feel a little forced though. I want to have the right to choose when to do Hildibrand quests and when to do relics. Now I don't have either choice, but to do both and backtrack to A Realm Reborn, well, I hope we see Geralt again. Can't fathom obtaining relics without Geralt. Oh, you know for a fact that Geralt's going to be there. One of the pictures is that they showed in the live letter was Geralt and Hildibrand together. I can only imagine, and Yoshi P even commented, what will it be like having the best blacksmith in the world and the best goldsmith together? What can happen? That's going to be quite explosive, I would imagine, and quite hilarious. But yes, you're right about the backtracking idea. I think it's not necessarily the fact that there's a lot of stuff to go through that seems to be a problem for some people. It's more of the fact that this is older content that they're going to have to backtrack through, rather than more relevant, more recent content, right? You could argue that the Ivalice requirement for the resistance weapons was at least more recent to the game and actually benefited from some of the modern day quality of life changes throughout the content that we did. But I don't know. It's going to be subjective, isn't it? Next, we've got Damai, who says, the full Hildy quest is a big ask. I'd think getting to, say, meeting Godbert or something would be one thing, but the entire quest line, including Endwalker, that's a lot of quests and cutscenes. Bozja required the Stormblood raids, Shadowbringers raids, but that's maybe one or two... Oh, Stormblood raids, but that's maybe 1 or 2 evenings to get the actual start of a weapon, and Eureka opens as soon as Stormblood is done. The full Hildibrand questline is going to take some people a week or more, and that's before you even get to the weapon itself, end quote. Yeah, so the length of the unlock process is probably one of the longest it's been. I would say it's probably easier, though, right? Am I right in saying that? I would say that the Ivalice raids are probably a lot more tricky, especially if you're grouped up in public content with that many players for the resistance unlocking. Personally, than say, for example, doing a lot of the Hildibrand stuff is solo. I think there's a few 8-mans, but it's not as strenuous, I would say. So whilst there is a lot of content, at least it's not difficult content in comparison. But yeah, you bring up a good point there. You bring up a very good point. Chris Kepler says, personally, I pretty much can't stand Hildibrand, so I'm a bit disappointed that the story elements of a new Relic will be a complete waste for me. I will still do it, but I will just skip all cutscenes and dialogue like I do with all of the other Hildy content in the game. I'm just hoping that there won't really be much, if any, Hildy theming to the weapon designs. Though I can't imagine that it would be the case outside of maybe one tier of the weapon progression anyway. Perhaps the joke weapons from the last weapon design competition will be part of this? That's a good point. So yeah, not really happy, but I just want the weapons themselves to look cool, end quote. I think they're most likely going to take some inspiration from Hildibrand itself, right? I would be very surprised if there's not a giant frying pan for like Warrior or something. You know what I mean? Are they going to miss the opportunity to capitalize on what they already have? I mean, these are Hildibrand legendary weapons. So I can't think of anything more legendary to the Hildibrand family than the Hildibrand family's weapons. So maybe they will be themed around that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they look crap, though. You can make something hilarious look amazing, right? Not just through adding glows to it. You can add a lot of detail to things. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Or maybe the Hildibrand legendary weapons are based on things that they were gifted by the gods of Eorzea or something, like the Saints. I've no idea. I'm sort of spitballing ideas here. But yeah, I'm thinking that they're likely going to have some comedic elements to them, at least. Maybe even a Hildibrand logo. I've no idea. We'll have to see. Chris D says reality is something has to lock relic weapon, so they have to pick something. Hildibrand is pretty popular and it might be a lot of fun, so they pick it this time and it either works or not. Only time will tell. I think if I could get a gun halberd, I might even tinker with Dragoon again. Oh, that's a really cool idea. Like a gun lance. Making a whole new zone for each expansion for relic grinding is a lot of work, and we really don't know how this will be implemented. But if they can save some dev time and provide a fun challenge, I say more power to them, end quote. That's a nice positive outlook. I like that. I think when it comes to designing Eureka-style content, I would be surprised if they didn't implement that at some point in this expansion, considering how popular that is. I know that a lot of people disliked it, but there was a huge portion of people that loved it as well. So we haven't got confirmation if there is going to be Eureka-style content in this expansion or not. I would say you might be looking at Hildibrand quest lines to like unlock the first few things and maybe some other content afterwards, or maybe a completely unrelated thing. But personally, my own opinion, I'm kind of hoping that there'll be some kind of Eureka style field instance as well at some point for something. But if not, if it is just through this quest line, then I suppose it answers a lot of people's questions of them wanting to progress a relic outside of field instances. One of the biggest pieces of feedback I read back when resistance weapons came out was there isn't enough ways of me doing this outside of Bozja. Why do I have to be forced into this field instance? Why can't I do this through dungeons and things? And people made the argument that it was taking people away from the queues, right? People taking away from that content. So it is a valid point. It doesn't necessarily matter as much to everybody, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do and if they do drop in any of that content. But I do like the idea of a gun halberd, like a gun blade dragoon weapon, a gun lance. Heck yeah, too much Monster Hunter makes me want to get that even more. Spook says, I'm all for Hildy quests, always loved them. However, I saw the backlash when you needed to do Stormblood Hildy trial to unlock Mentor Roulette. They should have known this would be just as bad to some players. Sad face. That's true. I think a lot of people sort of overestimate the time commitment needed to unlock some of this stuff, but at the same time, there is posing the question of what should and should not be required as unlocks for various things, including Mentor Roulette. But you have to agree, though, Mentor Roulette is basically governing content that new players are going to be going through. It's included in that, right? So I don't necessarily 100% agree with the argument that it shouldn't be an unlock requirement. I think that if it's content in a game that requires other players, then maybe that should just be included anyway, regardless of where it's from. But that's my personal opinion. I can understand the annoyance for some, though. Benoit Rosier, I'm sorry if I've butchered your name. I've tried my best, Benoit. I have no problem with relic weapons being tied to Hildibrand, they say. Even if we get clown weapons. No, I want a sword and a shield that you've got like an extra action button that goes ho ho, like the honking noise. That'd be brilliant. In seriousness, though, I'm more concerned that there may be no large-scale exploration zones this time. It's Eureka and Bozja that kept me logging in every week in the last expansions, end quote. I actually agree with you. A lot of the time that I spent on the game in those last expansions was either doing Eureka or resistance weapon stuffs in Bozja or Zadnor. As much as Bozja and Zadnor, in my opinion, aren't as good as Eureka, they offered so much like time synciness, complete optional time sync with loads of other rewards as well, like the floating chair mount, the Khalil or whatever it's called, from Final Fantasy XII, triple triad cards, minions, mounts, and things like that. It was awesome to have that as just a thing I could sink time into, because a lot of the time I have time for small things or like grinds towards something greater, but not necessarily like a lot of time. So like I would hop in that content quite a lot. So it'll be interesting to see if they do exclude any kind of large scale field instance this time completely, how I feel about the entire process. It's got to have a lot of grind elements outside of a field instance sort of situation for me to be attached to it, I think. And I think a lot of people will find that they'll get the weapon and go, right, got the weapon now, and I feel that with the Heavensward weapons as well, there's a lot of padding to those weapon steps to try and get you to spend more time on them, such as light stages in Alexander, for example, and things like that, but not a lot of actual content designed around it. So it might feel like a step backwards. So I'm interested to see as well. Hopefully they do come out with a field instance. Maybe that's something we need to ask Yoshi P. Civil Chev says, I feel like forcing people to do comic relief content in order to eventually get the best in-slot weapon for the expansion defeats the entire point of content being comic relief. When you want the comic relief, the long cutscenes are welcome, as everyone doing the content is doing it for the story. The minute you put power behind it, anyone who either doesn't care for that kind of humor or doesn't play for the story is now going to have to skip a ton of dialogue to continue their character progression. That is a good point. It is a very good point. But there have been requirements before that could be argued in the same way, right? Some people might not like the super serious tones of the Ivalice series, for example. They might not like the storyline, so they'll be skipping through as many cutscenes of that as possible, right? It's not for everybody. So I think that the argument could be probably posed on both sides of that. But they've always put power, as you say it, behind some kind of lock. As a person mentioned earlier, there always has to be some kind of lock. So my question to you would be, would you have preferred if they had introduced another field instance straight away with this, or what would your ideal relic weapon be? I think that's probably a question for another video entirely. Shadow Bearing says, been playing for about a year, currently mid 6.0 content-wise. Well, welcome to the game. I hope you've enjoyed your time. And I'm overall a casual player, in brackets, haven't done any Savage or Unreal content and don't plan to, end brackets. Fair enough. I personally tried the Hildibrand quests and did not like them. I got through some of the Realm Reborn ones, and while I know a lot of people say it gets better in later expansions, before I started my own Final Fantasy XIV journey, I watched Shenpai, play through a later expansions quest. The only moment I remember is that there were an old lady involved, and I think Vivi was there. Oh yeah, I remember. Like I said, I personally never made it that far on my own. And even while watching, I still didn't like them. Hildibrand is just not for me, and probably never will be. I'm just not a big fan of scripted comedy. Fair enough. However, I'm overall fine with making them a necessary step. Shadowbringers required you to do the Ivalice raid questline, and as someone who hasn't played Final Fantasy XII or Tactics, you definitely should, by the way, they're awesome. The story was confusing and rough to get through. I can totally understand that. Just as a side point, very, very tough material to read through if you don't know. Yeah, maybe they should have done a better job of introducing it to people who had never played it. So I don't feel this is any different. My current plan is to wait and see what the weapons look like, and if I like how one looks, I'll probably just skip through cutscenes, as slanderous as that is to all the Hildibrand lovers out there, end quote. People will complain regardless of what other people do. It's what you need to do to get the most enjoyment out of a game that's good for you, right? At the end of the day, you're right about the Ivalice story, though. As long as the story is introduced to somebody who has never played any of the other games from the start in its own way, then it can work. I think they did a fairly decent job to that end in Final Fantasy XIV's Ivalice content, but it was a lot of references that were probably a little bit thick and on the nose, and a lot of questions for people who did play those games. I mean, I played 12 and I've played Tactics. There's quite a few like muddled up bits here. You kind of have to suspend disbelief of what you know from those games to get the most out of this game's storyline version. So they're not exactly required either. It's kind of weird. It's in that weird situation. I get what you mean about the Hildibrand questlines though, but like you say, I mean, if you like the look of one of these weapons, you're going to do anything that's humanly possible in the game to get to it, right? Skipping content, unsyncing a lot of content, right? That's what a lot of people will do. Unrestricting, I should say, that's the new term, isn't it? Going in undersized. Yeah, I mean, do they look good? Do I want that weapon? Yes. For people like myself, though, speaking personally, I will just collect them all regardless, just because I like to get the achievements for them. I like to have a collection of them. It's like the resistance weapons. I couldn't stand some of them. They look like jelly beans attached to the side of weapons, like jelly on there, or jello, floating jello. But I still got them all anyway, because I'm collection mad at the end of the day. But yeah, everybody has a different sort of thing. I think a lot of people will go, what do they look like? Okay, they look crap. I'm not doing that. And that's fine. That's a total, that's where the optional side of things come in, right? But there is still the fact that you're going to have some power behind you that you might not have on your character unless you do ultimate and some stuff like that, right? So, especially for 7.0, because usually relic weapons take through into the next expansion and last year a few levels, right? I remember I still have relics equipped for some of my underlevel characters, which is, very good. So Adanis says, honestly, Hildibrand is the kind of character I absolutely despise in most forms of media. A character created and devoted to nonsensical comic relief. It's impossible to stay grounded or immersed into the world or setting with these kinds of characters for me, because they're so wacky, zany and wild, and are often found in fairly serious settings and worlds. While I was still new to the game back before Stormblood launched, I thought the Hildibrand quests were mandatory to progress to Heavensward. Oh no, and I actively quit the game, and ended your subscription, because they just aren't what I like about games like this. I don't mind them existing as side quests. People who enjoy them can, and that's of no consequence to me. But when characters like this are brought into serious parts of the game or story, it often reveals problems that are hand-waved away within their quests, since you have the serious part of the game meshing with the zany Looney Tunes style side, and that doesn't work well. I honestly may very well end up skipping these weapons altogether and not even bothering trying to get them. I dislike Mandeville and Hildibrand that much, end quote. See, this is exactly why I post this to everybody out there, and we've picked random answers here. And a quite decent sample, I think you'll agree, right? A fair example. Definitely, that's a side of things I hadn't seen. I think for me, I'm completely the opposite, and that's the beauty of a community, right? There's always going to be people who love and hate certain elements of something. It's definitely Marmite content, isn't it? Relic weapons locked behind this sort of content, or Hildibrand in general, right? You either love it or you hate it. There's kind of no in between there, or you kind of gain a love over time or gain a hatred after you realize something. Yeah, a lot of people seem to be leaning towards like the mandatory requirement as being such like a big thing. Maybe what I should do is I should do a video series of how quick it takes me, and put like a stopwatch on screen of skipping all the cutscenes with a new character and doing Hildibrand from start to finish all the way through, and we'll see how long it takes me with undersized parties and the fastest possible. And then we'll get a good idea of how long that takes. Yeah, I might make that a video. That's a good idea. And it was your guys' idea that made that a possibility. And then we'll get a good gauge. But I would imagine it's quite a few hours. But yeah, I suppose you don't really like it when they introduce the Namazu and things like that. I think a good storyline needs some form of comic relief, though, in contrast to that, if we were to critically sort of comment on that, me personally. I like it when they introduce like characters or elements that do lighten the mood a little bit, because if the game was so incredibly stoic all the time with like themes of death and rebirth and, the afterlife and, the Asians and the rejoining and all those things, if it was just purely that, it would be a great storyline. But without elements of a little bit of a hint of something different, a little accent to things, a joke here and there, I don't think it would be Final Fantasy, right? Me personally. You look at any of the other Final Fantasy games as well, I think that's sort of set the precedent for the type of content we get. There's always that zany sort of side of something, right? Look at Quina from Final Fantasy IX. There's no other reason that Queen is there, right? Sorry, Quina fans, but it's the comedy relief, right, to a very serious and desperate storyline. A lot of that just goes through Square Enix as a whole in a lot of their RPGs, even the ones that they don't create in-house, that they publish. You'll see that a lot of those things, like Octopath, for example, there's so much like levity in there, but there is still a really good, storyline there as well. So yeah, I think it's story building, but maybe this leans a little too far one direction, basically, for some people. I totally agree. I totally understand that. So Gillian Reese, hopefully I've not butchered your name, says, I got fed up with the Hildy quests. I have an addiction of doing all of the blue unlocked mark quests, and all they unlocked was more quests. Maybe this changes later. I didn't get that far, so it's moot. Apparently there are cool rewards, and if that had been the motivation, I might have stuck with it, but it was inconsistent and frustrating. If it's just cool rewards, don't mark it blue. Because of these feelings, I'm not a fan of the fact that it's now mandatory, though to be fair, at least now it actually unlocks something. So Hildibrand has barding, minions, mounts, titles, achievements as rewards. Triple Triad cards. Am I missing anything? So there is quite a lot of rewards packed into it. So the fact that it's a blue quest means that it unlocks something. So you do get a reward out of it. You get several rewards. Now, there are some times in that storyline where it felt like we got nothing. Stormblood, we got a barding, right? That was pretty much it. And we got like dancers before. But yeah, and glamour. We get glamour from there as well. But usually that stuff is related to the actual storyline itself, right? It's related to Hildibrand, so like it'll be a mount based on something. It'll be a barding based on something. I don't want to spoil anything, by the way. That's why I'm being vague. It'll be a minion based on something from his hilarious side quest, which adds to that kind of collectible. It reminds you of those moments. But without the rewards, it wouldn't be as prevalent as it is in people's eyes, right? When they added trials to Hildibrand originally, I was a massive fan of that. And they continued occasionally through that, like Battle on the Big Bridge, for example, and they have that iconic music there, and they have like the battle. It might not be the hardest battle in the world, but the fact that it's in the game in some way is both a homage to an earlier game or a reference to something with great music, and there is rewards, like there's a pet chicken, for example, like Enkidu, awesome stuff. So there is rewards. So I think that's, I would argue that a blue plus quest just means it unlocks something, right? But that's my opinion. You clearly disagree with that, and that's fine, totally. Because of these feelings, I'm not a fan of the fact it's now mandatory. Okay, my question to you is, do you often collect the other weapons in the game? So like, have you gone and done the animal weapons before? Have you got a relic weapon? And how did you feel about the process of that? Because in many ways, the access route for this is a lot lower of a bar than it has been before, right? The progress to even unlock it this time is quite generous, which makes me scared about what they might do in terms of like the progression of those weapons. The steps might be a little bit brutal, but we have to admit, if we're going to say Hildibrand is kind of like a casualized piece of side content accessible to everyone, then you know for a fact that the weapons will be accessible to everyone. But they always have been, but there's always been some form of prerequisite. But yeah, it's a point, definitely. Captain Jolly says, I think it's perfectly fine. Relics are and have always been optional content. I'm also a pretty hilarious... Oh, it's also a... Not you. It's also a pretty hilarious storyline to go through, and I can't wait to see how they pull this off. Godbert is a primal sustained by patrons of a gold saucer. I mean, it's in his name, right? Godbert. End quote. I completely agree. I'm going to be just blown away if he's not one of the... he'd been blessed by the 12 or something. What would be really nice if they kind of like cross-pollinated those storylines at some point. Like, I don't know, maybe Birregut's hammer is required to like hammer out a piece of it. You know, you can imagine Hildibrand questline going everywhere in the game that's currently being accessed, right? Maybe maybe it's your job with Nashu to go and confront a god and get him to like use his hammer on your weapon. I don't know how else. I don't know how else can you see this turning out. Anything is possible. That's the thing about this. Nothing is sacred from this quest line. You could go anywhere with this within reason. Of course, there are things you would need to unlock for people to have context, such as those alliance raids, probably, right? But there are plenty of places especially in Fafnir and all of the new zones, right, that were added in Endwalker. Think of all the storylines that could be involved in this, and you know, the prestige around Godbert and I don't know, the family Mandeville, having some context behind that and seeing exactly where they get their power from, or at least hints at it, would be rather fun. So I'm with you on this one for most of it. I agree. Relics have always been optional content, and that's where I sit with that. Really, if you don't like the look of a weapon, then it's probably best not to go for it, because you're not going to gain anything from that. But yeah, I think most people will you know, do themselves a favor by sitting, seeing what the relics look like, and deciding if it's worth it for them. And if they don't like those sorts of storylines, they should definitely skip through those. Let's just do a couple more before we wrap up. Ellie BT says, I'm one of the few that hates Hildibrand, so I'm pretty aggravated by that. I haven't got up to Endwalker stuff yet. They are the first cutscenes I started skipping because they're so bad. I did them because blue content was locked behind it and never went further. So I'm pretty mad that some really stupid side content is now mandatory for player power. That's a big fat note from me, Square Enix, end quote. You see, the thing is, though, the benefit of power locked behind content when it's introduced to the point where, okay, so the relic weapon will always be good for when it releases, but for a small time window. In 6.2, we're going to have the new Savage series, right? So there's going to be a new Savage weapon. The relic that's introduced in the 6.2 series will always be, and it always has been historically, lower item level than the best weapon you can get from Savage, right? So already, mandatory for player power is not really an argument fully. It's an argument you could make for saying, oh, well, I want to have the ability to kill things faster in like a hunt or something. But for raiding, raiders will always go for you know, the best in slot item. So I think that there is an argument for maybe progressing towards that, but the first few weeks of raid progression, a lot of people, you know, they race to get that stuff cleared, and then they have access to that weapon. And as a leg up to get to that stage, then the resistance weapon, then the relic weapon like comes out, and then it helps them close that gap. It's more of a gap closer than player power, and it's got such a small use case scenario. Like, you don't necessarily need a relic weapon just for its power to do the content in the game daily. Like, you could do Unreal Trials, you could do Extremes, all of that stuff totally fine. You can do Savages with totally nothing to do with a Relic. You're not going to be, set back by this in a major way in terms of the power of a weapon. You also have to remember 6.2 introduces new crafted gear, including weapons, so the gap's going to be even closer. A lot of people will be in full crafted gear with pentameld and a pentamelded weapon, and that will be good until they get their savage weapon, basically. So it is an argument that I will stand behind, the idea of that, yes, it does give you player power, but there are so many other ways of getting power for your character that are easier, that are comparative, and the final stages are usually the best in slot weapons in a game, but the final stage always, and this is historically correct, comes out after the Savage tier has been way completed, right? The fourth wing of Asphodelos will have been out for at least like a month or two, right, before they put in the final stage of the Relic. I'll be very surprised if it's any earlier, because they've not done it before. So, the idea of Blue Mage content locked behind it, I mean, the idea of Blue Mage is that it's more optional content, right? So you've basically mentioned two pieces of optional content. Sometimes the overlap is necessary, and I believe there are, correct me if I'm wrong, places you can get some of those spells outside of there. There might be one or two that are locked deliberately to like Fungar, for example, but I'm pretty sure they added other, options to get those spells, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I need to look into that, but you're probably right, yeah. But it is optional content. When you go down the route of optional content and side content, you have to understand a lot of it is like either dependent on other things. Like Blue Mage is very much dependent on the entire world, right? Encompassing access to everything. Again, you don't need those spells, really. They're not like needed. And if we're going to talk about Mass Carnival, I've done guides on a lot of that stuff as well on the channel. You don't need the spells from the Hildibrand trials, technically. I mean, if you want to be a collectionist and complete that, then obviously those pre-requirements come in. But when you're talking about Blue Mage content being locked behind it, you have to remember a lot of the raiding, raid bosses, trial bosses. If you never wanted to do like Sephiroth, for example, well, you'd be missing out, right? Oh, well, not Sephiroth, but you know what I mean, like Ifrit and Titan and the rest of them. And you get a higher chance of getting those spells if you do it on a higher difficulty with a matched party, right? With a pre-made group. So you're better off doing the higher end stuff. It's an argument. It's not one I fully support though, but I completely value your comment though. Thank you for contributing, and it's definitely an opinion, absolutely. And lastly, let's just let's just go to this last one. Fabrice says, "I love the Hildy idea." Love is in capitals there. I agree. I hope the resulting weapons are wildly different than what we've done before. Not tacky, mind you, but different. End quote. I completely agree. I'm really hoping that they don't just stick jelly beans to the side of a weapon this time. I'm hoping that they go full on frying pan to the face, massive, like you unsheath this frying pan and it's the size of a car, and you, I want it to be zany, I want it to be wacky, and I want them to have some detail to them. I don't want it to be tacky, but I want it to look really quite awesome, like a big skillet, or, what else would there be? There'd be Godbert's hammer, right? Maybe? I don't know. Would you be able to get Godbert's hammer, or at least a replica of that? I still think they're going to go down the route of like family heirlooms, right? Or there'll be references here and there. It's a shame we don't have like a bombardier job in the game so we could get Nashu's bombs. I think that would be fantastic, just throwing bombs at people like Bomberman. But, I can't wait to see either. So there we go. Those are a small sample, but still a sample that I picked at random from 74 replies to my comment. I think majoritively there are probably in this sample, there are a lot more people who lean towards disliking it. It has to be said, but that could just be because of the ones I randomly picked, right? There probably is quite a lot of positivity in the comments as well. So I think it's going to be literally 50-50, isn't it? You either like or hate the content, but some people are more willing to go out of their way to just skip through the stuff to get to what they want if they like the look of it, whereas some people are completely averse to the idea of it even being in the game, and that's totally a decision that you'll have to make for yourself. What I would recommend personally is to, if you've never done Hildibrand before and you've never, like maybe you're new to the game, give it a go. You never know, right? There are trials, there are, there are encounters, let's say, without spoiling too much, that are worth your time. The music is fantastic. Orchestra and rolls are locked behind that. Mounts, minions, triple dryad cards, glamour, you name it. I would advise it, honestly. And even if you don't like it, it might be a good idea to just skip through the cutscenes and get the rewards at least, even if they'll be slightly out of context. Anyway, thank you so much for interacting with me. Hopefully this video sort of addressed this. We've been sat here for probably longer than I should have, but I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt and give you the voice, honestly, to talk about this stuff so that we have a good idea of where the community, at least from a small sample, sits in terms of how they perceive this content. I'm very excited to see what they do. I'm reserved a little bit about what kind of content we'll be doing to actually unlock the stages and what kind of stages we could be looking forward to, because personally I think this is a low bar of entry, so usually that's a sign that it might be a little bit tricky. You know, there needs to be time consumption, so every relic weapon has a time sink that's optional. It's not going to be any different this time. Let's hope that there's a good variety of ways to do things. What I liked personally in the Resistance weapon series is that where you had the choice of multiple instances you could do for certain things, or you could do it within the instance as well, right? So well, I can't even remember any of the stages. I've tried to blank it out. But when you're after those shards and you can do anti-tower, or you can do the other things, you can even do deep dungeons. Hopefully that idea is kept, because I quite like the idea of having, you know, many ways to tackle something, so that if I do repeated relics, which I will, there's variety so I don't burn out. Anyway, much love. Enjoy the rest of your day. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about Hildibrand. Maybe you haven't had your say. Interact with people in the comment section, and yeah, I'm excited to see what people say. I'm even more excited for 6.2 though, and a series that brings these weapons as well as Island Sanctuary and things like that. Awesome optional stuff on the horizon. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.